Antonia, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you for having me, Jacob.
We were on a trip with the Hans Seidel Foundation.
We were.
Earlier during the German elections.
Indeed.
And that has been a very protracted process.
You know, it's the Germans. They do everything meticulously.
Chancellor Merz is now officially Chancellor.
Yes.
So I was wondering, what is your take on the developments that occurred today? Merz fell through in the first round in the Bundestag, as apparently some members of his own party did not vote for him to become chancellor. This was a humiliation. And then on the second round, later in the afternoon, he was approved. What do you think this tells us about the German political scene and Merz's future? Is this just a speed bump for him, or a sign that more unsteadiness is in the future for Germany?
I think it can be a lot of things at once. I think the CDU is a party that has been changing a lot since Chancellor Merkel left. Merz has been seen as a more conservative figure within the CDU. And there's been some people who have not been very comfortable with that. Some people who view last fall when he decided to vote, the CDU and the CSU voted en bloc with the AfD on some migration measures. That made some CDU members unhappy. So there's, I think, some friction in terms of where the party is and where it's going. Merz has, unfortunately, also has a sort of history of failing many times before he got the job. I think that with 6 of his members voting against him, it's historic and not in a good way for him. First time in the Federal Republic of Germany's history since the end of the war that this has ever happened. Clearly 6 members were protesting something. We don't know what. We don't know what they asked for, and we don't know who they are, but they want something. So, there is, of course, this is going to harm him in the short term, but it is really remains to be seen what will happen in the future, because frequently we just don't know. I mean, Helmut Kohl is not the strongest when he first became Bundeskanzler back in the 80s, and he became one of the most iconic chancellors in German history. So I think we'll have to see, but it was not a great day for the new chancellor of Germany.
Well, Germany faces the rise of the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, which has just been branded by the government as an extremist party, yet it's the second biggest party in the Bundestag, or federal parliament. You have an economy that has experienced zero growth in Germany, and you have a military that still appears to be in shambles. Do you think that Friedrich Merz, who comes from a business background and has suspended the debt brake in Germany so that they are going into deficit spending for both the infrastructure and the military, do you think he has an auspicious chance of turning the country around?
Yes, I do. It's going to be, the proof is going to be in the pudding. I mean, for most voters, for most people, it doesn't matter in Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, it is pocketbook issues that matter most. And their stagnant economy, which really has been struggling, obviously, over the past 5 years, in particular, the last coalition government really epically failed. He is a businessman, and they need someone like him. They need economic reform, and they need it desperately. Having said that, I, as an American, as a German, I would be troubled that the government decided to weigh in on what I believe is a political matter in terms of the AfD, beat him at the polls, beat him in the political system, as opposed to having them labeled an extremist party. And there's no question the AfD should be a cause of concern. The Likud party of Israel has decided to cozy up with some of the more hard-right political parties of Europe, with one exception. That would be the AfD. The AfD, its history is an interesting one. It didn't actually begin as being sort of a far-right, sort of flirting with Germany's Nazi past. That's not where it began. But some of its most prominent members do knowingly flirt with the country's Nazi past. there's, I think, one of the governors in the former GDR, he has openly used the word Lebensraum, and I don't think anyone needs to...
Just for our listeners, GDR is the East Germany of the German Democratic Republic,
Yes.
and Lebensraum is living space, a term used by the Nazis as they invaded Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union.
Yes, and I think the same gentleman said about the Second World War and the Nazi regime that it was mere, what was it, bird droppings in
Yes.
Germany's
Yeah.
great history. But I think putting that aside, which is significant, but there's clearly a protest movement in Germany against the established order, against the established parties. And that's what happened in that vote what was that, in February? Yes, in February. So I think these politicians need to be very careful to really deliver what they promised and not give voters a reason to keep protest voting for the AfD. And again, this is Germany, and in Europe, they don't have the same political system that we have in the United States, which is big, loud, and with lots of money. But there is a very easy space to knock the AfD back with a real campaign against them. And I would if I were them. But I think for Mr. Merz, back to your question, I think it's to be determined. He's going to have to actually make dramatic changes for people in Germany. They're going to have to see improvement in their pocketbooks, the most essential issue for them. And I would say, yes, of course, rearmament is very important. And yes, they're going to spend a lot on defense, and that's really important, and they can reindustrialize in some spaces. But again, most voters, it goes back to Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. It's always the economy. And so he's got his work cut out for him. His coalition government has its work cut out for them. We'll see if they can pull it off.
Mr. Merz has also indicated that he thinks that Europe's relationship with the United States has been permanently altered by the rise of President Trump. I'm wondering, how do you envision Europe's future right now? You have the UK trying to cut trade deals with the EU and walk back some of Brexit. And then you have French President Macron, who wants to build up the French military, French nuclear forces. You have ferment in Poland, where there's speculation about potentially acquiring nuclear weapons. I'm just curious, you're very involved with Europe. How do you see this developing?
I mean, Mr. Merz is right. This is a very new chapter in Europe's history. It's got to figure out its own future. The United States has decided to be much more Fortress America. Its interests in the world are just not what they once were. And so Europe has to figure out what it wants to be and how it's going to do that. My one concern, in particular, when I think about France, and it's how very French of them, everything is very statist. And sure, I mean, of course, only a state can buy tanks or fighter jets. Only states can consider, the question of nuclear weapons. But they have to actually make real, meaningful economic reforms. I feel like I say this all the time. There can be nothing that they do as they rearm, as they build up their militaries, unless they actually start unlocking their own innovation and the potential of their people. The fact that Mr. Draghi, Mario Draghi, the former head of the European Central Bank, last fall issued a very important report that just really went through the challenges that Europe faces from an economic perspective and a growth perspective. And if they don't start tackling them, they are always going to struggle to compete, in particular against the United States and China. So, like I said, the Europeans have a lot they've got to do, but if they take a purely French and Brussels approach, very statist, they will continue to export their best talent, their best ideas, and their best companies to, frankly, more hospitable business environments, which continue to be, from a European perspective, continues to be, unfortunately, the United States. They've got to reform, and they need to fast track that alongside their efforts to rebuild their defense capabilities.
Let me turn the focus a little bit towards you for a second.
Oh, good Lord.
You just wrote a piece for the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune.
I did. It was fun.
on the UK, in which you wove in your own family history. You talked about the industrial decline of northern England and the effects that that has had upon the local population. Can you talk a little about that?
Sure, and I think it's one of those things when I was writing it. I mean, this is a tale that we see in Germany. It's going back to Germany. You go to the Ruhr Valley. That's a big AFD part of the country. It used to be a steel producing, used to be an industrial base for Germany. You see this in the United States and in the post-industrial parts of the United States, whether it be in parts of Ohio or Michigan. The reality is that for the UK, the North was the engine of the empire. It was steel. It was coal. It was so much that fueled its exports and empire around the world. But Manchester, Middlesbrough, which is where my mother is from, which was nothing, probably around 1800, and it grew into this industrial base, really big British steel production there. You go up to Newcastle. They used to have, in Scotland, massive shipbuilding, also in Belfast. These have gone away. And there are a lot of reasons why. Modernization, they just really couldn't compete. Labor unionism was not helpful back in the 70s. And for people in the United States, they really don't understand how bad things were in the 1970s in Britain. I mean, they had rolling blackouts. The trash was literally not picked up. They had, for Billy Elliot, that wonderful film about this young boy in a very sort of working class part where his part of the country, his father and brother were protesting and striking, and he was studying dance. That was really what it was like all across the UK. And so when Margaret Thatcher came in, there was radical reform that needed to happen. They could not maintain these industries, so they went away. And Middlesbrough is just a shell of its former self. And, I haven't been there in a long time, but I remember going there when I was probably 19 with my grandfather to go get, because I've retained my British passport, to go get my national insurance card, equivalent of a social security card. And waiting in that government office, it was just a sad place. And I think, there is really a loss that people feel of identity, of self, of importance, of community, of cohesion. And, the promises that politicians across the board have made in the UK about the promise of a good future has just not borne out. And I think you can see that across many industrialized economies in the world. We just talked about Germany, we talked about the United States. This is very true in the United Kingdom as well. So, these voters, whether they be certain AFD voters, a lot of Trump voters, in this instance, in the UK, they just had by-elections where Reform, which is the Nigel Farage sort of upstart party, they did very well. I think at this point, the political class really needs to start listening to them. But again, it's not just listening to them and giving them pablum back. There has to be real results. And that's the challenge for some of these upstart parties like Nigel Farage's UKIP party, for example. Actually, he's Reform, it was UKIP, or even the AFD. They have to be more than just anger, fear, and hate. And that's something to get people to the polls, but you've actually got to be reasonable in terms of a governing agenda. I do not think Reform is capable of doing that in the UK, but they've certainly tapped a lot of anger. And with the AFD, they're, in my opinion, their sort of radicalism when it comes to embracing, or some of them embracing, some of Germany's more difficult past, shall we say, and frankly being far too pro-Russian, are going to be problems. But it's up to the established political class to actually challenge these parties in a real and meaningful way. And right now, whether it be in the UK or in Germany, it has not worked, but we'll see.
It is the disintegration of political systems, isn't it?
I don't know if it's political systems, but certainly of the established political parties certainly being challenged. France is an ungovernable mess. You have to be very careful too. This is what I meant about, when the German government decided to label the AFD, and I would be much more comfortable with that being resolved at the ballot box and through politics, is that when you start denying people who their vote or their choice, and they think that it's a bureaucracy blocking, that makes them even more angry. So I think the established political systems have to be, and political parties have to be careful. They can also be strong, and they should also challenge them. There's no reason to be weak. Challenge them, debate them, engage them, and engage their voters. And, just retreating in when it comes to the UK, just to Westminster and to the South and London is not going to do you any favors there. And lastly, I would note the one very interesting thing about Donald Trump, and he's a sort of different figure, but the thing that I admire about Donald Trump and his team that he's always understood is that you have to go directly to voters. And he has built, and his team has built, an incredible communications infrastructure to inform their voters. Now, some might say that some of the information that they give out directly to some of their followers and their voters may not exactly be accurate, and I would say that's correct. But they've understood that they don't need the Washington bubble. And so when I think about some of the politics of Europe, whether it be London, Berlin, Brussels, Paris, if they only are listening to or thinking about the bubble press and are not actually going and engaging their voters directly, they're going to lose every time. It is so important that they think differently about voter engagement. And I'm not saying they have to do it in an American way, but they certainly have to do it differently than they've been doing it. And they also actually have to make real progress and show voters that they're hearing them and taking action.
Let's talk about American politics then. Since you, Antonia, have worked for former Speaker John Boehner.
I did.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I did. I worked for 2 majority leaders.
A long string of Republicans. And the Republican Party under Donald Trump has obviously morphed into a new entity where the people that you worked with are now sort of...
Oh, they're rhinos?
Or, have been more on the defensive, let's put it that way.
Okay.
I won't use an opprobrious term like rhino.
Okay.
But what is your take as a longstanding Republican, someone who's worked on Capitol Hill for many years and at IRI? What is your take on Trump right now with the tariffs? And there's a lot of speculation that he may actually have overreached, that his policies are going to boomerang on him. Washington Post today has a story. They go to Lehigh, Pennsylvania, which voted for Trump. And now you're starting to see a few cracks in his coalition. It's not, an earthquake or anything, but there are, murmurings of insecurity or even discontent with where he's headed. I'm wondering, what do you think?
Well, I think it's important to remember, and I don't think people fully appreciate this, but the political parties in the United States, the Democratic Party and its infrastructure, and the Republican Party and its infrastructure are very weak. Very, very, very weak. We don't have to go through all of that and why, but they're very weak. The Republican Party is not the party of Reagan. I think we all realize that, but it just really bears noting it is not. It is a on-the-right, populist, government-pushed, centric organism, shall we say. And, but I think Donald Trump, he's going to struggle in one sense that the reason he won was the economy. He beat Joe Biden on concerns about inflation. That was it. And right now, he is playing in the space of trying to radically, and he is radical here, reshape the sort of economic system that the United States has thrived in the world. And there are going to be impacts. He has said it himself. And I think he is so committed to that vision that he has. It may not be one I subscribe to, but I mean, it's not like he's been very vocal about his views on tariffs. He's been exceptionally vocal on it. He is willing to see pain He said it repeatedly to get to what he believes will be a stronger America. Now, I tend to be somewhat of a radical myself when it comes to taxes and growth policies. I don't like government telling me what kind of car I can or cannot buy, what kind of television. They use national security justifications to protect America's movie industry. I don't like any of this. But, when it comes to these Trump voters, here's the thing. The man is going to be in office for another, over 3 years, 3.5 years. And so he's got a lot of time to do a lot of things. And he's got a very strong theory of the case that through the executive, he can do it. And so he's going to. And, for some of these pockets of people in parts of this Trump coalition, parts of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, etc., we'll see if they're going to blame him. For now, I think most of his voters are going to give him a pass and see. But we also have to remember that despite Donald Trump's very historic election, and it was historic, he really didn't win by that huge of a gap. We don't have blowout elections in this country, and we haven't had them for a long time.
Which is another issue, right?
In
We'd
what
be
sense?
better off if we did. Because there's no real majority for anything anymore, is there?
No, but the way our political system is with primaries, if you're running for re-election in 2026, you're in a place where you've got to go through a primary, and those are Trump voters. It's an off year, a midterm year. It is going to be the most diehard that come out in a primary. The sort of more less invested in the political system types usually just come out in presidentials. So for anyone who is running, who does on the Republican side, they always have to go through Trump voters in a primary system. And then they're going to have to pivot back to run and win in a general. So he has an ironclad control over this Republican Party. And, no one should underestimate that. So to understand, he is that transformative figure. And I think for anyone who is running or looking at our political system, many Europeans who say, well, look at these tariffs, this is hurting people. At the end of the day, Trump's voting base, they love him, they support him, and they will for the foreseeable future continue to. And that makes Republican politicians who are running again in 2026, it's the whole House of Representatives and a big group of Republicans up in the Senate. It's going to make it very difficult for all of them to navigate this. But I mean, it's early on. Donald Trump says we should wait and see. I think I already know it's not going to be good for working class voters because many of these tariffs are on goods that we're never going to make in America, or if we do, they're going to cost a lot of money. So for working class people, and a lot of them are not real active voters, they are going to pay the price for this. But Donald Trump understands that and says it's worth the price.
Now, you said earlier that the parties are both weak.
Very.
Which is true. And I suppose the result of reforms that were enacted, right? Where you don't have the party bosses the way you used to. In fact, we didn't even have primaries. Do you think there is a figure in the GOP today, after 2026, that could reshape the party?
Nope.
Not even Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia?
Nope. The ecosystem is far too built out. It is far too built out. It's too much money in politics for that to ever be consolidated back into a party. It's impossible. You cannot unring that bell. Senator McConnell, who is a big party guy and fought John McCain all the way up to the Supreme Court over campaign finance. I remember he had a meeting with the House Freedom Caucus many years ago, and Senator McConnell was trying to expand the contribution limits that go into the political parties. And Mark Meadows, then the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, who went in to be a Trump chief of staff, I think his last chief of staff, there was a very interesting debate between the two. And Senator McConnell said, I just want to make sure I understand that you are against this. And he kept pushing him as to why. The answer was they didn't want power in the political parties. Why would they? If you can build an entire infrastructure and other centers of gravity of power outside of a party, why wouldn't you? And that's what Donald Trump and his universe has built. They don't need the party. Unless, I mean, it has a functional place when it comes to, when you go and vote, you're a registered Democrat or Republican or independent. There is the state apparatus. But when it comes to the information space, basically the Republicans in 2024, they gave out their entire ground game to, I think it was Turning Point. So they've really given out, maybe democratized, some might say, I might not call it that, but to other power centers and power structures that are very much outside of the party system.
So in a sense, in 2028, both parties could field someone, like the Democrats could run Mark Cuban and the Republicans could run someone totally outside the political system as well.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I mean, but this is the other thing. Running as an outsider is not a new thing, right? Obama ran as an outsider. Carter ran as an outsider. Reagan ran as an outsider.
But Trump is the first who didn't hold any military or political office.
That's true. That is absolutely true. So we'll see. I mean, he is a symptom of a lot of decline in terms of the party's weakening over time. He is sort of a symptom of that. But he and his entire universe of people have created, like I said, an infrastructure that is significant. And it should not be underestimated. I mean, the vote for Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, there were some Senate Republicans who were, let's say, a bit wobbly on him. And the dogs were unleashed. And they voted for him. So, there is a sense of fear out there. But then at the same time, I also think if you're sort of more of an old school establishment Republican, the country did vote for Donald Trump. So I think for a lot of these Republicans who come from more of an old school, traditional, whatever you want to call it, Republican perspective, they also are trying to, I think, be responsive to their voters who voted for him while trying to work through what is their space, how do they play in all of this. But I will say our founders would probably be a bit disappointed in the say lack of robustness from the Article 1 branch that is the United States Congress vis-a-vis this dramatic expansion of executive authority.
Final question.
Okay.
So it sounds like you're saying that Trump's impact, not only on the Republican Party, but on the American political system, is not ephemeral, but will be long-lasting, even when he's out of office, potentially.
There's no going back. No going back. And if you're, say, on the center right, you have to think about what it is that you do moving forward. And, I remember many, many, many years ago, I think this was back in 2010, there was an incredible congressman from Delaware, and I'm forgetting his name right now. And he was in a primary against a woman who called herself a witch. I'm not kidding. Look this all up.
Right, I remember this.
And he lost in the primary, and everyone said, well, this is Delaware. How did he possibly lose to her? Well, at the end of the day, the problem for more establishment types is they typically don't generate the enthusiasm to get people out to the polls. And so, being enthusiastically moderate or establishmentarian, that's not what gets people going. And this is the thing about politics. The thing that generates enthusiasm typically at the polls, with Obama being one exception, even though he did run against the establishment, it's fear and anger. And whether it be in Germany, the United Kingdom, France, or the United States, that motivating factor has to be understood. But going from that into governing is a very difficult question. But as to what you said, there is no turning back. We don't know what the future will hold, but certainly the United States, as sort of this beacon in the world, is dramatically shifted and changed. And our political systems, all of them, are dramatically different and changed.
Well, Antonia, these scintillating insights mean that we have to have you back again
All
soon.
right. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.